and here it is, part 2 of my exclusive Steve Lyon interview series. If you've not seen part 1, you can see that by clicking up here or in the link in the description below. But this is the big one, part 2, where we focus exclusively on songs of faith and devotion. In this interview, which is over 75 minutes, you are going to hear information you've never heard before. Now, usually content like this is only available on my streaming site, which is watchvg.com, but it has been made possible for you today by our generous sponsors. And I want to thank those generous sponsors, and your names will come up in the end of the video in the titles. If you enjoy my content, then please do consider signing up at watchvg.com, where you can see in-depth versions of all my videos, including the ongoing Depeche Mode album review series. But for now though, just sit back, relax, as we dive in deep. Do leave your comments at the end. Enjoy. Hello to you, my friend. My special guest today is someone who's worked on some of the most iconic records of our generation. He's worked with everyone from S.O.F.A.D, Depeche Mode, The Cure, and countless others. Mr. Steve Lyon. Steve, how are
Afternoon.
you?
I'm all right, yeah.
How's things?
Yeah, good. A cup of tea in my hand. I'm all good.
Well, following our extensive Geek Talk chat, we're going to speak about the one that everyone's looking so forward to, and that's Songs of Faith and Devotion. I think which some would have called the Depeche Mode opus magnum, the highlight of Depeche Mode's career as far as a lot of fans are concerned. Let's just talk about your role in that. You were an engineer?
Yeah, well, just briefly, I worked on Violator.
That's right.
They recorded Personal Jesus and Dangerous and in Milan, and then they've been up to Puck, and then they came to London at the Church Studios. And there's a bit of a backstory to that, but I won't go into it now. But anyway, so I worked on that, and then I did the live tapes at the Church Studios. And there's a bit of a backstory to that, but I won't go into it now. But anyway, so I worked on that, and then I did the live tapes for the Violator tour, and then recorded various gigs on that tour, which I don't think have ever been released actually. And then I worked after that with Alan and Flood on S.O.F.A.D, and then I did a Recoil album, and then while we were making that Recoil album, the demos came in for Songs of Faith and Devotion. Well, I don't mean we didn't know it was going to be called that, but anyway, turned into that. And then we were kind of chatting, and I had no idea who they were going to work with. I didn't take it for granted they were going to come to me. But I'm very glad they did. And I remember I got a phone call from Flood, and I was in Italy at the time, and I had to find a fax machine. He said, I need to send you some stuff, you need to find a fax machine. And basically, they'd found this house in Spain, as it's well documented, and eventually we went off and did part of the record there. And then there was I had to find this kind of backwater shop that had a fax machine, and they faxed over this stuff. And he was like, well, look through it and, what do you think? And we kind of had a few chats about, gear that we might need and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I was the engineer, yeah.
And I'm sure there are lots of, as you said, it's well documented about living in that house.
Yeah.
So did you actually live in there as well? Okay, so you all lived in there?
Yeah, it was the band, myself, Daryl Bermonti, who was kind of the band assistant.
Oh yeah, so we know Daryl well.
We know Daryl, yeah. Daryl was quite a character.
He's always around, isn't he?
Daryl's a great guy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you can't help but like Daryl.
Yeah.
We bumped into each other again when I was working with The Cure, because he ended up working with The Cure as well. Yeah. But that's another story. But so yeah, we all lived there, and there was a chef, in the house. And Flood had just done this amazing work with S.O.F.A.D Baby.
Yeah.
And they'd taken the decision to be in a house to record. And it didn't faze me at all. I thought it was a great idea. I'd done a little bit of that kind of thing before, but nothing on that kind of scale. So we, for the best of my memory, we had a meeting in London, and kind of okay, we'll write down on a sheet what you might need. And it's not, we're talking quite a while ago now, so 25 years ago.
30 years ago.
So it wasn't easy, getting gear and setting stuff up. Like you just now, I've got my little computer I stick in my backpack and off you go. So I said, okay, well, this is cool, but I think what we should do is set everything up in a rehearsal room, as if it's the control room, and make sure that we've got everything we need. Like MIDI cables, leads. Flood had all this gear, that I wasn't familiar with at all. And he had this, the big Roland system, whatever, 700 was it, and incredible stuff. So we set the whole thing up just to make sure that we could kind of plug and go, basically. And then it all got taken down, stuck in a lorry, driven over to Spain. And I went to the house to give it a recce, just to kind of go, okay, right, well, where are we going to set up? And we put in some sliding doors in between there's a huge lounge, so we divided it into, well, I didn't, but engineers came in and did that. And then, put some carpet down in one bit. It was a little bit ad hoc, but with a game plan, hoping that it would work. And then, as I say, the gear turned up. I was there before the band. Set all the gear up with the help of the guys from the hire company. And then the band turned up, and then, started work. Yeah.
And there were, obviously there were a lot of surprises there. It was a very, as Flood has said, once again well documented, a very different sort of atmosphere. Following Violator, it was a lot more intense, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, to a degree, I wasn't. It wasn't although I wasn't aware of it, but I think for me it was just really exciting. And the funny thing is that although we, I'd spent time, a lot of time with Alan. I'd spent a lot of time with Flood. I mean, Flood, I didn't know he was going off to do S.O.F.A.D Baby. I mean, I found out later, they said he was leaving, but I didn't know he was going to work with you too. And then I was like, oh, he's gone off to Ireland, and they're doing it in some house or something. That's my kind of vague memory of that conversation. But I just thought, wow, what a great idea! This is brilliant. We're out of a sterile recording room. We're kind of setting it up on our own, and we've got all these different spaces that we talked about on the phone. And then subsequently we had this kind of meeting in London, and that we can use. What a great idea. So I really enjoyed it myself. I mean, you can't sometimes, the atmosphere, it kind of hangs in the air. But I wouldn't say it was, for me, I wouldn't say it was an unhappy time, or I didn't feel that it was necessarily difficult. But that's from my perspective.
That's fine. Yeah, and Flood, obviously, he obviously talks about it being a very difficult record to make. But besides that, the rest is history, because it turns out to be one. It is a fan favorite. I want to ask just a few detailed questions now. Dave spoke about Condemnation being the best vocal he's ever done, and that was where you would have been involved in the recording of that. It was in the. I think they set it up in the bathroom.
No, we're downstairs. Yeah, I mean, fantastic vocal performance. Firstly,
yeah.
I mean, incredible. I remember doing it, but downstairs of this villa was this kind of underground car park, and we'd kind of stored the flight cases and the wooden crates that we later crushed and jumped on to make the rhythm sound of the track. And I can't remember how it came about, with if it was Flood's idea, it was Dave's idea, I don't know, but anyway, he decided he wanted to be downstairs and record the vocal, and it had this really long reverb. And I do remember, Flood was like, is this going to be all right? I said, yeah, it'd be great. It's going to sound different because it's in this massive room. Dave felt comfortable, which is the most important thing. We had the candles out, and the atmosphere, the vibe was good, and he absolutely killed it. Because correct me if I'm wrong, others may know better than I, but initially that song was a Martin song, so that was going to be his vocal. But Dave felt really passionately that he could nail it, and he did, certainly, yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, that's interesting. And just so obviously recording something like that, you obviously got a lot of the sound of the room, obviously.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
So he'd have the headphones in, and the track was fed to him. And
yeah, well, I because again, going back to the conversation with the facts and working out with the rooms and stuff, I'd actually asked if we could have a multicore that go downstairs, because I was using it as a reverb room. So instead of using a reverb box, I put up a couple of microphones downstairs, and there was a speaker, and I was old school using it as a reverb room, and we used it on various things. The original version of Judas, for example, I remember doing stuff. I did all kinds of bits and pieces, put some guitars down there and stuff, but that was my intention. And again, I can't remember how exactly it came about, but we did the vocal down there, and it fantastic vocal performance. The sound of it, obviously, is quite particular. But that's the fun of working in a different space, in a different environment. And the performance, again, it's amazing.
Yes, and of course, this was obviously, I've often spoken about this, Depeche Mode always, when they made an album, every album, the idea was to, push the frontiers forward, make a different record to the previous one.
Yeah.
I often said that this record was very, very radical in the sense that, Violator is I think we can all agree, such an amazing album. And I think if they had done Violator 1, 2 and 3 after that, they'd be forgiven, because that was an amazing sound. But the fact that they decided to do a 180 and just go in a completely different direction was, quite risky, but it was because it was such a different type of sound. And also the approach was so different. Violator was very programmed.
Yeah.
Whereas this is, and I think in the documentaries they said, whereas I think they were very used to programming things because there's a certain control you have. But now being put in an environment like, let's play some instruments, like, where do we start? And that's what I think made it quite difficult.
I just think that you start from a place and then you just start working. I mean, I personally, the whole difficulty thing, I mean, I wasn't producing. I'm not in the band. I was there to make sounds, so I enjoyed myself, and found it a really interesting environment because I'd never done anything like that before. I mean, Flood had done it, with U2, and had some. I mean, I remember listening to Axton Baby, and it absolutely blew me away. It still does, but it was just a fun environment, just to use. One of the first things we did if I remember correctly, was put Alan on drums and get some rhythms. It's one of the first things we did. And Flood was like, right, get me a great drum sound. I'm like, all right. And I'm working with one of the best engineered producers in the world. I'm like, I better get my shit together. It's like, okay, I do, I went very Glyn Johns on it, 3-4 mics. And, that was, I think it was ended up, loops for In Your Room and a couple of other things. I can't quite remember. But, those, using the space, using the environment, and there was a lot of sounds that came out of that are so particular. And I think that's the thing that always excites me, when I listen back to things and think, like even the piano and Walking in My Shoes and stuff like that, how we created that,
How? Which was how?
Okay, well,
it's layered with a guitar, is it? And then
no, it's piano.
It's piano.
But what it was is we had an old portable cassette machine, and I can't remember why now. Maybe it was the demo or something. Al would know, Charlie would know. But anyway, it was the vibration on it was basically he was standing there going don 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 bang like that with the cassette machine, and we were like, oh, that sounds good. So I was like, right, I'll get a mic. Hold it a minute. Here's a mic. Let's record it. Goes in the sampler. And that was basically how it started. And there was a lot of that kind of stuff.
Just really thinking out of the box and just.
Well, I just think that sounds good. Use that.
Yeah.
Let's not get too caught up on it. Let's get scientific about it. But then it goes into the Akai, and then there's it's mixed with other things. I can't quite remember what it was mixed with, but like the loop, the bass loop on
Walking in My Shoes?
No, on In Your Room.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of delays and that kind of stuff. And I was using this thing. Do you remember I was talking to Gareth about the H3000?
Yes.
The delay unit, and I knew it really well, and it's a great bit of kit. And so I fed it into there, 4 different delays, and there you go. There's a bass.
Was that
a
a
bass rhythm.
System 700 creating the bass sound to that? The actual
I can't remember.
Simon?
I think possibly the original tone, but most of the shape is the...
So
Could well be, I can't remember.
Because that to me is what's so intriguing about that is that the way it moves from side to side like that, and it's and I think you've actually got that same sound playing all the way through the song, even though there's key changes and stuff. It's that constant.
I think so.
Yeah. So which gives it this.
So.
There's masking on it as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
All this masking and stuff, and of course, what's noticeable about this time was also this was Alan playing drums, and he just actually started playing drums for the first time. Is that right?
I don't know whether he played drums on things before, the previous albums. I really don't know, but on Violator, he played the snare on. Put it on. What's that?
Blue Dress.
Yeah, and we did some. Waiting for the Night to Fall. He again played some snare, which was sampled. Halo again, but this was just kind of snare drum because we were like, okay, we need a snare drum. Well, let's make one.
So just hit one.
Let's not go through a sample thing. Let's make one. And that was very much, our well, certainly my philosophy was, why would we go to a sample bank? Let's just make our own.
Mm.
So the loops, sometimes were inspired by pre-made loops, but then you'd go, okay, we want something that's kind of like that.
Mm.
So then Al would go out and play some drums, and then but that's the vision that Alan Flood had. Making it was like, it was a lot of work, but it was well worth it.
Mm. Mm. So I think Flood was very important, and if we talk about Kevin Paul, who you met at the recent event, he sends his regards, by the way. He did all the 5.1 mixes of their surround sound mixes, and he does go on to say that Violator is just outstanding, as did every other producer. They just hold Violator up as the most amazing thing. But now Flood was very important because up until then, I think they had these they had these rules, and I think Dave Bascombe also smiled when they came in. They said, we never use the same sound twice. We never use hi-hats. And he was like, and Dave Bascombe just kind of, yeah, okay, whatever. Whereas Flood was a little bit like, your preconceived ideas are crap. You're a great guitarist. Why the fuck don't you play guitar on your music? You know, and so Flood, I think, really pushed them move into Songs of Faith and Devotion. They pushed the ante. And the funny thing was, as Martin said, when they got to Songs of Faith and Devotion, they had turned into the band that they were rebelling against when they started off being electronic.
Oh,
so guitar sound was very important in this, and I think Dave Bascombe did say that he would like to think that he introduced them to the idea of feedback. You know, using a lot of guitar feedback. And stuff. Now, in this record, there is so much guitar feedback. So I'd like to just talk a little bit about guitar sounds, what cabinets you used, and things like that.
Well, I mean, some tracks I remember using the EBO. EBO is this kind of little device that basically vibrates the strings, and Martin was kind of, you know, we played around with that a lot. There's a little bit of that on Violator, but that's a sample in Policy of Truth. But I think the idea is that nothing was kind of out of reach. There were no, you know, dividing lines. I mean, again, you know, you really have to talk to Charlie or to Flood about that. But
no chance.
No, but I mean, the genius brains behind it. You know, the production side, and the sound side as well. But you know, my job was kind of to be there to, how could I say, be the catalyst towards something that may or may not get used. So on the desk, we had a Soundcraft console, and off the sends of the desk, I had there was an MPEG bass amp, there was a Leslie cabinet, there was a Roland jazz chorus, there was a reverb send down into the garage downstairs, which, you know, as we said previously, with Dave recorded vocals. We did backing vocals down there with Martin as well. But it was you know, feeding. So they'd be coming up with these sounds, and it'd come up on the console, and I'd kind of fiddle around and go, well, what does that sound like? You know, bit of distortion here. You know, cranking the desk, just not random for random's sake,
but experimental.
And thinking, okay, well that sounds okay, but what about if we do this?
Yeah.
You know, and not everything made it, obviously, and quite rightly so. But that was something that I really enjoyed. And you can do that to a degree, you know, in plugins like setting up buses and setting up distortions and reverb and stuff. But there's something about the organicness of the Leslie just going, you know, and that vibe that it gives off, or just the hiss of the guitar amp, or the sound of the room. And
things that you can't repeat because they kind of happen.
Well, they happen at that moment. You can't do it again.
Yeah.
Because half the time, you know, the levels, the sends were coming in off the Akai's or off live instruments. So when, you know, Flood might be working on his System 700, was it?
Yeah.
And, you know, other bits of kit, or Al was doing something, or, you know, Martin would be playing guitar, and all these, you know, collective of bits of audio information would kind of get summed, and there was your sound. And so you'd go, right, quick, sample it, you know, because if you don't, you know, something's going to change, or they're going to do something different. Well, we had a 24-track analog machine. So of course, at some point, you know, you can't run all the samples and all the bits, and you know, if you have an individual sound of something, quick record it, and then, you know, we'd see if we could do something with it afterwards. And I think, you know, a bit of that was, I remember as a kid watching a documentary on, again, Peter Gabriel 4, and him with the Fairlight. And the Fairlight was this, you know, one of the original samplers. And so you get, you know, you'd record something, you know, very low quality, and then you'd play it up down the keyboard, and it will go up and down in tone. And just the experimentation of that, I just thought, wow, that's just fantastic. Kate Bush did it. And so that always kind of stuck with me. So, the organicness, I mean, I'd like to think from like working with someone like Glyn Johns, and where it was everyone set up, live, going for it. And then the other side of it, the sampling side, but then messing with the sounds.
Yeah.
Was really interesting combination. And to have that, firstly, to have that amount of time.
Yeah.
And it was hard work, because there were a lot of these different ideas. Some of them got used, some of them didn't. But I think the proof is in the pudding. The time spent on those songs was worth it. But the great thing about it is, the great thing fundamentally about working with the band is just how good the songs were.
Yeah.
Because you pick up an acoustic guitar and play half those songs. They're just great songs.
Yes, absolutely. They're the foundation of it. And I think if we take Achtung Baby, which is a very different type of record, I'm not going to say that you two are not as innovative as Depeche Mode, not at all, but they are conventionally a four-piece rock band. So there's kind of there's recording that band and then, recording it and being innovative with it. Depeche Mode always had a very different approach. It's almost like all the rules went out the window. So you could be very, very off the wall with things. Was the desire to be as outlandish as possible with, not outlandish, but as creative and really push the frontiers?
I think, fundamentally it came from within the band.
Okay.
And from Flood. So, again, if I remember correctly, what I've been told was when they first got together and said, right, we're going to do another record. They had, the band meeting with Flood. Again, I wasn't part of that. But talking, subsequently to Charlie and listening to the interviews that he's done, there was a conscious decision that they didn't want the demos to be too finished. They wanted to be able to expand and work on it in a slightly different kind of way. Now, you think about, having the success that they had with Violator. Enjoy the Silence is still, and Personal Jesus is probably still two of the most popular and well-known Depeche songs. And then to do another record, but not be worried about the fact that you've had success.
Exactly.
And then to move on and do something different. And Flood had done that also with Achtung Baby. They, coming off the Joshua Tree and doing something so different. You've really got to commend that. It takes balls, but it's hard work. And again, from watching documentaries and hearing interviews about the difficulties with Achtung Baby, there are obviously going to be those trials and tribulations, and the band had been together a long time before I got there, so I was very fresh, but again I really enjoyed it, and I feel very fortunate to have been in the room. And there was a lot, don't get me wrong, there was a lot of kind of, okay, we're up in the morning, okay, we've got to go at this again, okay, sit down. And I'd be sitting there watching what was going on until I thought, okay, it's my moment to interject. But not necessarily with fiddling with the computers and stuff. My job was the more kind of hands on knobs and fiddling about. So
Flood is saying, do this for me, and you've just got to...
Well, there's things like, I remember running, Flood had an old 808 drum machine. So it's a classic piece of kit. It's a well-known piece of equipment. Then, it was kind of, that's kind of, viewed, in my opinion, incorrectly as kind of old school and not really worth it anymore. But it's a fantastic piece of kit. And then my thing was like, okay, that sounds good, but what can we do with it? Let's see if we can just razzle it up a bit, And I don't remember at any time where someone came up to me and kind of wrapped my wrist and go, "Get your hand, leave it alone." They just, it was that kind of environment for me, so I loved it.
Just coming on to what you said earlier on about the demos, and this was definitely Charlie, as you call him.
Sorry, yeah.
No, Alan. I think Alan had instructed Martin. I think around about this point to submit the demos in a more straightforward way. I think before that they were a little bit more fleshed out, and I think coming back to what you said earlier on about demo-itis in the Gig Talk video. You spoke about, if a demo is too well fleshed out, then you can become too attached to it. So this way it was just do it simply. I just want to just randomly say, if you listen to more recent Depeche Mode albums, I've gotten hold of the demos. Those demos are really, really well developed, and they're almost to the point that the demo is there and that the finished product's not far from the demo. But that's another story.
Okay.
Certainly in this case, it was, the demos were very, very sparse, very, very basic. Because there was no pre-production period in this record, as far as I know.
No, I, as far as I'm aware, we just kind of, everyone. I didn't have a copy of the demos, but I heard them. All apart from can't remember the title. There's one track with the strings. And down on my knees again. One Caress. So I wasn't party to One Caress because that was written later and they did that in London. Yeah. But I wasn't there because my daughter had just been born. So
that was 30 years ago.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Oh my God,
crazy, isn't it? But fantastic! What a tune that is, man! Wow. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, from what I was told, that's what they wanted, and I remember sitting in Conk, working with Alan on Recoil album, and the day comes as I've got the new Mode demos. Do you want to have a listen? I was like, well, yeah. What do you think? And we sat there, had a cup of tea and a bun, and just kind of listened back to the tracks. And I remember, it's quite sparse. A few on piano, a bit of guitar here and there, but not. I don't remember hearing many sequences and stuff like that. So I haven't heard obviously the demos to recent records, so I couldn't say.
No, I remember hearing the demo to "I Feel You," and it's quite interesting to hear because Martin's voice is a lot more. It's different to Dave's, but it's a lot more agile. So he kind of does this "I feel you." He's got this beautiful way of singing it. Yeah. Of course, he doesn't have that raw aggression that Dave has got. I want to ask you this could go on for long, but don't worry, we'll limit it. In "I Feel You," there's that kind of sound in the background. What the hell is that? It's kind of like a bass, but it sounds like a reverb. Where it goes. It's very domineering. It's almost overwhelming, but it sounds great. It's
well, it would have been a sequence of
okay.
And it was probably fucked with quite and a quite. Yeah. So I can't remember. I can't remember where it started, but where it came from. But I actually, funny enough, I remember it. Some of the bits and pieces because long story, but after the album was done and everything, and they wanted to, start doing the stuff for the live album. Then it was kind of like, okay, Alan obviously, it's like, okay, what can we do live on this song and what can't we do? So it's deciding then. Because there's certain things you can get away with on record that if you put them all live, it just comes like a cacophony of sound. So there was a bit of trimming down, but again, there's certain things on there that are so particular, and it was really interesting. Well, that's another story, but going on about the live thing. But anyway, just hearing back the multi-tracks from previous records. But I can't really comment on what they've done previously. I subsequently. Getting more familiar with the albums and the songs is very stuff. Mm. But that's the one thing again that always strikes me, and I think Martin is just so. I mean, now they're in Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is, and quite rightly so, it should have been put in there a long time ago. In my opinion, but just the quality of the songwriting is unbelievable. It's undervalued, Martin, but by a long way.
Just one more sort of specific question, which
told I have to ask you, the bass part on Walking My Shoes, is that Charlie on the bass? Is that before?
Yeah.
Yes. So
it's Alan on the bass. Yeah. I've got a picture of him doing it. If you really...
Fantastic. Because I figured that wasn't dung. And
again, it's got a delay on it.
It's delayed, yeah.
Yeah.
And is it laid with anything else, or it's just a bass sound?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm being too intense now.
The thing is that it's so difficult because
there's nothing
that we did really stayed in its original form.
This is what I'm saying. Like if it was U2,
maybe apart from vocals, but everything else.
If it was U2 now, that would be a bass sound. But because it's Depeche Mode, there's always, like, I'm thinking of the lead sound on Rush. Do 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 do. I mean, that's a guitar sound, but it's got so much going on it and resampled and stuff.
Yeah, it would, well, more than likely, I definitely. But I mean, I remember actually Rush, the middle bit of Rush. I remember working on that in Germany, and that coming to fruition. Because I mean, from my angle, I felt that when we left Spain, that was one of the songs that wasn't quite clicking. But that's just me, you know. Opinions are opinions. But then, obviously, later it turned into the anthem that it is. But you know, it just takes work, you know.
It does. It's all that. Let's move on to the live shows, because you and Alan did a lot of the programming for the Devotional, the backing tracks.
I mean, but basically what happened was that we went to Spain, and then Fletch, God bless his soul, went off and did videos of various studios of where they thought they might want to go next, which was just, you know, what a fortunate position to be in. I was a kid at Christmas 5 times over, and so they went to a place in Bologna. They went up to Hamburg, and they decided to go to Hamburg, and my then girlfriend was pregnant, and you know the drop date was mid August. It ended up being the end of August, 31st of August. And I said to the guys, right, you know, it's like, well, when, you know, it's time, that's kind of me, you know, I've got to go, you know. And I had, you know, again, Daryl was just fantastic, you know. So I get the phone call, you know, that I had to fly back, you know, arrived late, you know, Sophie was already born, but fantastic experience. And then I was there for like 10 days, and then you know, I got the phone call like, "Well, you coming back?" You know, I was like, "Yeah, I'm coming back." And PK filled in that period.
Right. So obviously, after the production of this record, we got the tour, which was Devotional, and you, Steve, were instrumental in helping Alan with the backing tapes.
Yeah, I worked after Violator. We set up upstairs at Mute, and we did the live stuff for Violator tour. And I remember chatting to Alan. So my daughter was born. We were in Germany. I went back to Italy for a little bit, and then came back to Germany again. I can't remember for how long. I think must have been like 2 or 3 weeks. I was like, guys, I've got to go home. We've got a brand new daughter. I mean, my daughter's just been born. I remember having a conversation with Alan, and he's like, "Well, when are you ready to come back?" And I said, "Well, I'd say after Christmas." So this is Sophie was born in August, end of August. So, and then he went to London. I did some great stuff, you know. Again, you know, One Caress. I remember hearing that the first time, going, it blew me away. A fantastic piece of writing, really well recorded, sounds amazing. And I remember after Christmas, you know, no text messages then. You know, I get a phone call from Charlie, and it's like, "Oh, you know, come over, you know, play the album." We finished the mastering, you know, and then spent a long day. And he went through, you know, what they'd been through. But because some initial mixes were done in Germany with Spike Stent, and I don't know if any of those mixes were used. I don't think they were, and then it was all kind of redone again at Olympic.
So Spike Stent did the mixes, but they weren't used. So who?
No, Spike did mix the album.
Oh, okay.
But what I'm saying is while we were in Germany, he came over and he did some mixing. We were still recording in another studio. He was doing some mixing. So those particular versions of those mixes, I don't think we used.
I see.
I think they worked together. Well, they definitely did work again on them in London. The details of that I don't know because obviously I wasn't there. But I remember, the album being finished, got a call from Al, and I was like, okay, yeah, sure, okay, I'm ready. What are we doing? And he's like, right, we've got to do the live stuff. So I'm like, okay, cool. And it was at Olympic, which sadly is now closed, the famous studio in Barnes in South West London, not too far from here. I'd worked there before. And downstairs we had basically what they'd done is they got all the this is how detailed he is, and this is why I love it so much. He's got all the original multi-tracks from the songs that they were going to do, and the idea is that to have a system where instead of playing the same set every night, they could change the set list, because obviously if you're running from tape, you play the same thing in the same order every night, and they wanted to do that slightly differently. So we got all the original multi-tracks from different Black Celebration and Music of the Masses and one thing and another, and some of them had to be baked, literally put in an oven, so the oxide would re-stick to the tape, because otherwise you put them through the machine and the oxide would come off. And some of them were so badly degraded, even when we were doing it, that I had to keep cleaning the machine all the time. That's how detailed it got. And so anyway, we decided what songs they were going to do, and we started, madly sampling. And then we got this brand new box in from Roland, which was
DM-80.
DM-80, right? That's right.
The Depeche Mode 80.
DM-80, and it was an 8-track digital recording unit, which I'd never seen one before.
Was it brand new?
It was brand new. It was a brand new product.
So you were like the guinea pigs trying this out.
Well, I'm not sure who else had them, to be quite honest, but we've in the end we did feel very much like guinea pigs. So anyway, we spent, I think we spent the best part of about 2 months at Olympic. So sampling all this stuff, rearranging the songs. So, the intros to, Walk in My Shoes and things like that were different. Higher Love was the first song of Life. So that, again, working all that out and getting the flow and, the vibe and the atmosphere together and running it all off the samplers. And it was like, right, okay, so we've got it basically done. You basically got a desk, you get the balance that you want. So the bass drum always comes out of channel 1, and the snare drum comes out of channel 2. So it's easy for the live engineer, John Lemon, who was the live engineer at the time. Not easy for him, John's brilliant, but, just so you knew where everything was. And then you put it into this DM-80, and, the quality of it, if I was to compare it to what we use now, is probably, not anywhere near as good quality, but it worked. But the problem is that it wasn't really built for what we wanted to do. So if you're thinking of a live show, I don't know how long the Devotional live show was, but let's call it a couple of hours, it just physically couldn't hold that amount of information.
It was tape?
No.
It was digital?
Digital, yeah. So it was running on elementary digital recording. I don't know what the bit depth was, probably 4.1 sampling frequency. I'm really not sure. So as we were adding more and more songs, so we did, if I'm memory recall correctly, we did like 22, 23 songs that they could then kind of shuffle them around and put them in different set lists. So the thing was, with DM-80, you could say, okay, we're going to play Person of Jesus. Bang, Person of Jesus would start. I want to play Stripped. Bang, that would start. So we put them all into the machine, and it basically got slower and slower and slower. because it just couldn't handle the technology at the time. Just couldn't handle it. It's not like Pro Tools now where you can, have a session for 2 hours and just jump around. You just couldn't do that. So we started to, struggle a bit with that. There was the call that, it was getting to the time when we had to, start thinking about band rehearsals. And, let's say the tour, I think the first production rehearsals were in Belgium, in Leuven, if I remember correctly. And it was like, okay, we've got a date, we're going to go over there for a couple of days. And so I was like, okay, well, I better go home and I need to do drum practice, because Alan had decided that he wanted to play drums on certain things. I was like, wicked. So he played loops and played drums on some of the songs in Faith Devotion. So he wanted to expand that a bit. So anyway, and he had a studio at his house. So I was like, okay, wicked, no problem. We'll take everything to the studio. And I remember it vividly, okay, packing all the gear away. I'd seen, the lads, Martin Fletch and Dave had been over. Obviously they had band stuff to think about, and, still working on the release of subsequent singles and videos and things. So I can't quite remember. But anyway, so we all got together and it was like, okay, we're going to debunk and go to my place. So I was like, okay, wicked. And it occurred to me at the time, I was like, well, we don't actually have a backup. So we got all the Akai and all the the discs and all this stuff, but we didn't actually have a backup of what we had put into the DM-80. So I remember talking to one of the guys, the digital guys, one of the maintenance guys, at Olympic, a fantastic bunch of people. I said, listen, do me a favour. Can we get a 32-track digital machine, Mitsubishi? Can we get one of those? And I said, it's 8 tracks. So, can we record it 8, 8, 8, 8 across, I don't know why I did that, but I thought it was a good idea. So we had, the same thing split. And, and he was like, oh, right, we're going out for a curry. All right, we're going to the pub. Okay, come on, let's go. I was like, Charlie, wait a minute. Let me just do this. And I remember, putting the 8-track in record, pressing play on the DM-80, and it was however long it was, with not all the songs, because some of them we hadn't quite finished, but the majority of the live stuff. And we went to the pub. We went to dinner, went to the pub, and went back, closed it all up, and we went to Charlie's studio. And so anyway, it's well documented. But so one morning, I get to his studio at his house, and he's in the main house. I'm in the studio, kind of like firing up the machine, because it took a while to fire up. And now 1 gigabyte of memory. I mean, you could, even on the USB stick they're massive. But it was in a 19-inch rack box like this, it's in like that kind of size. And we had 2 or 3 of them, because obviously it's a lot of information. And the way it used to run, it was explained to me one of the guys at Roland, which is why it was so slow. It used to run in series. So basically it would go in one box and in one box and in one box, and then the machine would read everything and then allow you to play it back. So that's my recollection anyway. So anyway, I get in the morning and I'm firing up the machine. I can't remember exactly what happened, but it didn't fire up. I'm like, oh, that's a bit weird. So, I was like, turn it all on. Had to turn it on in a maybe I've turned it on in the wrong sequence. I've done something wrong. It's always finger trouble usually. So, like turning it on, bang, straight up, nothing. Fuck. Okay, let's not panic just yet. So, I did no more. Went over to the house. I said, Charlie, I think we've got a bit of a problem. Houston, we got a problem. Went back over, and later I discovered that there's if my technical prowess isn't that good, but anyway, there's a thing called a header block right at the front of a hard disk. So it basically says, yes, I'm here, and you can then pass through this gate and you can read the information. So something at the front of the hard disk had died, and we couldn't get to the rest of the information. So we're on the phone to the guys at Roland. I can't remember if one of the guys came down to the studio. I don't think so. And then kind of panic began to ensue, where we were 2-3 weeks away.
2 weeks away from rehearsals or from live shows?
The live show.
Jesus. And you had no backup.
Well, we did.
You did.
I mean, I can't remember whether it was rehearsals or because the rehearsals were going to be at the venue for the first gig. So they'd set everything up, the video and all that stuff, for the first gig. And Anton had done all this fantastic work, video stuff, which is really think of when he did that and the technology available and the imagination. It was really good.
It was beyond its years.
Oh yeah, it was
absolutely
amazing. When I first saw it the first time, it blew me away. So anyway, it's like, well, what are we going to do? And I was like, aha. I said, Charlie, do you remember before we went to the pub, we did a backup. So we've got a recorded version. So did no more than rang up. Again, it might have been Darryl, or certainly wasn't me. But anyway, someone rang the studio and said, "Do you remember that 32-track digital backup you did? Can you send it over with a tape machine?" So in the 32-track Mitsubishi is a big piece of kit. So anyway, we had it, so that's good. And then, the ensuing kind of like, well, what do we do now? So it was then decided that, not by me, but, okay, this is going to be the set list. It starts with Higher Love, and I can't remember exactly the whole set list. This is what we're going to do. And we decided to take, or they decided to take 2 digital multi-track Sony machines, 24-track machines, and the backup to that was a DAT machine with time code on it, so everything was locked together, sequenced together, which I believe was also sent to the visuals as well. I'm not quite sure how all that ran. So it was all kind of synchronised together somehow by someone far clearer than I. But my concern was, is this going to last? Because like 2 digital machines moving around all the time on the road, and it worked basically. And others know better than I, but they took Roland to court, and I believe they got their money back.
That's interesting. Wow, that's and you could hear the silence in this room now. This we all know the story so well, but it's coming from the horse's mouth here. I'm about to call you a horse, even though we're in the
call worse things.
Anyway, okay, so that's interesting, and I love the story about where you were doing the backup, and you were like, and Charlie, as you said, was going for a curry. Well done you for actually doing the backup.
Let me just quantify that. That's my flippant recollection. I'm sure it wasn't exactly like that. Okay. Because Alan's far too professional and far too sensible to just kind of run out the door. He's not that kind of bloke. But basically, we realised that we didn't have another backup, physical and backup and. Now we've all got 17 hard disks, all with backups for good reason. Even back in the day, when you had an analog multitrack, you would do a copy of the analog multitrack and keep it to one side, and then you'd work on something else, on the other, the copy, for example. And then, in the end, it all worked out, and then there were different stages of the tour. And I remember we went to Milan and to do pretty much the same thing, where they wanted to change the set list and use different songs. So there's some difference. I'm not quite sure what period of the tour that was. It might have been to go to, because I think it went to South Africa. They went.
That was the exotic tour. What they did was, I think with 93 the Devotional started. Devotional. And then, of course, what they did was, because it was such a huge set, they had to scale it down for the Southern Hemisphere. So I saw them in South Africa in '94, and it was called the Exotic Tour, which was essentially the same. It was just a smaller scale down. Instead of having that huge, they have one screen. Yeah. So it was the same songs. It was just
Although they started with Rush.
They started with Rush. Yeah.
They didn't have all the projections.
It was
a
scaled down.
So maybe then.
Yeah.
You know better than I. Maybe it was for that tour then.
Probably, yeah.
So we went and we did. I'm just trying to think of the name of the song. We did a new production of a different track. I Want You Now. Yeah, very good. Well
yes, that was actually using some of the samples from Pipeline and things like that.
Yeah.
And this is interesting.
That's a great version. That.
Amazing. You did obviously. So this is a key point here. The DM-80 went down, but you did have a backup. You didn't have to reprogram everything.
No, it was all in the samplers anyway.
Okay.
So it was all. Don't get me wrong. It was all in that. But the thing was that you
so close to the.
You couldn't. The idea is that you couldn't trust the technology at the time on the road. You know, the thought of that everything, being in these samplers. And the other thing is there was so much information that samplers take time to load up.
Yeah.
It's not as if in between songs you can just go, okay, well, wait a minute, or wait for 4-6 Akai samplers all to load up, and then it was just too complicated. You do that in the studio, but you can't do it live. So that was where it was like, well, it's going to have to be on tape, which is a firm medium. The problem is that are the machines going to take the wear and tear, which I believe anyway. The whole of the Devotional tour was done on the two Sonys with the DAT running. I mean, I asked Daryl.
That's interesting.
Daryl might know.
We're coming for you, Daryl.
Maybe Alan would know as well, obviously. But but I believe. The digital machines and the DAT lasted the whole tour, and we had, I think, 3 set lists in the end. So there was the original one, the Exotic tour, and I think there was a different one for the States as well. I can't quite remember because I think they did One Caress was only on the American tour. Is that right? Because I remember the other thing is that. The decision was made to make a video of the Devotional tour. So I had been out in Europe to basically, multi-track record various gigs that was then going to be a double live album of the Devotional tour. And then, obviously the video would then come out with it subsequent to a later date. That's my vague memory of it anyway. And so I'd been out, I don't know how many gigs I recorded, a few. And then they called me because they decided that they wanted to do a live version. So a live album, Devotion, Songs of Faith and Devotion live. And the only song that we hadn't recorded in Europe was One Caress. So quite nicely, they rang me up and they said, do you want to come to America and, come see some gigs and maybe kind of press a couple of buttons? So I was like, okay, that sounds good. So I went over and we were supposed to go to New Orleans, which was cancelled for one reason or another. I can't remember why. And I remember being in Houston in a studio. I remember it for a few reasons. One, because I had a great time watching the gigs and going out with the guys. I also caught a really bad cold because it was like boiling hot outside. Inside the studio was freezing cold, and I caught a cold.
Change the temperature
in Houston, Texas, where it's 40 degrees outside. But anyway, so we recorded that. We did some work on that. We did some work on that there. Did some touched up a bit of vocal and stuff. Because we'd also done some recording after the tour. We went back to Olympic, and then we did some, a bit of tidying up because you couldn't, you could sample, but it was just easy. Alan just played it bits and pieces, played it again. Not that he made any mistakes, but I don't know why we did that. But and there was a bit of vocals, done.
Something that's interesting as well is something my channel's being well known for is I have the multi-track. I have the samples of and I play them to people and I say, listen to this and blah blah blah. I've got the Devotional sound banks as well, and it's interesting to see that.
I used to have them in my magic box, which is
we want to have a look into your magic box in a moment. But what's interesting is the way, if you see the Emaxes were programmed, was that something you and Alan did together? So you'd actually have to load all the samples into.
Well, one of the reasons we had to go back to, or they chose to go back to our studio was he wanted to practice drums, and there was the programming of the keyboards to do.
And he did that with you.
He did that, yeah.
Okay.
Well, the way it would work is he was definitely the visionary behind that. He go, okay,
such a lot of work.
Oh, man,
he's just done this. I'm sorry, I'm not going to get Alan Barr the fanboy here. He's just done all the. He's done all the programming in the studio. Now he's still got to. He's done the backing tracks. Now you've got to map all the sounds on the keyboard. Back in the days when this was really difficult to do, before time stretching and all that kind of stuff.
You had basic time stretching, but it wasn't the time stretching where you could make something bigger or larger and it would stay the same pitch.
So he did all that.
You still have to get it all within a certain amount of memory because they didn't have endless amount.
Yes. So he had to consider loading times and he had to do it for all three keyboards for all three members.
We did it. So he would say, okay, on stripped, okay. So there's the fireworks at the beginning, but because it was a timed thing, obviously it's within rhythm, and you've got then the drum machine comes in. So it was like, okay, the beginning of the song is going to start bam, 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 bam. So I think Alan played that. So he's like, I'm going to do that. Then there's the fireworks and there's percussion. Okay, well, Fletcher can play that. Martin's going to do. I can't remember quite what Martin's parts were.
Martin's is the he's just the string. And
okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
fanboy with you.
No, that's right. I'm curious. I can't remember.
Watch the video afterwards. I'll show you.
Okay.
But,
so Martin did that. Yeah. So there was, that on every single song.
Yeah.
And then there was there were songs where Alan would decide, actually, I'm going to play drums on this in your room. Okay. So if you're going to play drums on it, we've got to work out
who's going to do what.
Yeah. And there was songs where Martin would play guitar, and so there was all that playing. I mean, he was used to it by then, but it was an enormous amount of work.
And something that I've become a little bit unpopular for saying on my channel, but I'm an honest person, is like in recent tours, it's like live drumming on every song. And the live drumming doesn't work on every song. And this is what was great about the Devotional and the Exotic tour was certain songs he'd be on the drum kit and you'd go, yeah, those songs suit live drumming. But then there are other songs like World in My Eyes that don't need live drum. And then that's electronic drum. So there was just this amazing, the musicality where he'd move around from one instrument to another. He'd know what every song needed. And also because Alan wasn't a drummer, he hadn't been drumming for long by the time they went on tour. But because he programmed the songs, he knew what the feel was and he knew how to drum it and how to.
I didn't,
is that
enormous amount. Yeah, completely. Enormous amount of courage to take on that amount of responsibility.
I know.
And do it so well.
Yeah.
It was a lot of work, and I mean, I can remember some very long hours in the studios when we were in the studio. Some very long hours at Olympic doing the live stuff. But it was fun because what we were doing was just great, and it's always good when it works. Yeah. So when I remember going to a rehearsal studio. I think we went to Nomis, which is in Chiswick, if I'm correct, in South London, and Dave was in there with the backing tracks, doing his rehearsals. And the Sam and the other lady who was backing singers, they were in there doing their rehearsals. and just kind of, then I wasn't pressing knobs and buttons. It was just kind of, you know, sitting back, watching what was going on. I think we were just there to make sure that, you know, everything was cool. I thought, oh, that sounds good, doesn't it? You know, and it just, it worked so well. And then, you know, going to Belgium, I had no idea really what was going on. I knew Anton was up to something, but I wasn't party to the meetings, the endless meetings probably there were for that. You know, it's a meticulous organisation. And then, you know, to sit back and watch the full rehearsal with the screens and everything, I was like, wow, that's really, it's always difficult for me sometimes is when I see, okay, you work on a song in the studio, you know, it goes out and then you see a video representation of it. And sometimes it clicks, sometimes it doesn't. It's purely personal taste. But the symbiotic relationship that Anton has with artists, particularly with U2 and particularly with Depeche, just works so seamlessly. And I'm sure there was a lot of talk. You know, I wasn't party to it, but the end result worked so well. And I remember watching, man, that's just brilliant.
But it could have gone so wrong because, as you say, because for so many
all art projects are like that.
As we say, and this is the thing, as we say with the DM-80 now, and you know, you were pushing it to do things that it wasn't designed to do, and also that, you know, that stage set, you know, look, do it now. When I interviewed Bino Pescatola, who you must know, who did the.
I've never met him actually. We've spoken on the phone.
We're going to have a podcast with just to let you know.
That'll get you.
We're definitely going to have a podcast on this, and so there you were pushing the front. You were okay. These days things are done, and you know, and you know, we look at the technology and how easy it is to achieve things today, you know, with the technology. But back then, what you were doing with it could have gone so wrong, you know, with if you think of it.
I don't think we ever really looked at it like that. Really, it was a challenge. I mean, you know, I remember conversations with Flood. You know, subsequently, I hadn't really. I didn't know anything about S.O.F.A.D, unfortunately, and then I found out a lot about S.O.F.A.D because then it was like, okay, we're going to do this. You know, we want you to be the engineer on it, and the challenges that had gone on, you know, before I was involved in different projects, and they'd kind of learnt it so well. So I just swooped in on this massive learning curve that they'd been through, and we just ran with it. But I don't think anyone really was worried about it not working. I mean, I think that's a very flippant thing to say. I think you're all, as an artist, it must be difficult because you are concerned, you know, that the product is going to be up to a level that you think it should be. And Alan was definitely, you know, in control of that. The band, it's not just Alan, the band as well, it was a collective. Everyone had their role. And particularly again, you know, with Flood's vision and production, it just worked. The teamwork, as fragmented as you know, I've heard stories about it, which some of them take with a very large pinch of salt, but it worked at the end of the day. Yes. And the difficulties that as an artist or as an out-and-out producer that you have, I didn't live those because that wasn't my role. But it was just really enjoyable because nothing was ever out of bounds. That's just really cool.
You know, and with all the work we know it's a lot of work, but the way you've explained it and articulated it so well now, it just emphasizes how much work there was involved. It's no wonder Alan decided at the end of this, okay, that's enough, because it is such a lot of work to go through all that, not only the work, but also the emotion of it all. And then just at the end of it, you just go, okay.
It's not for me
or for any of us
to cast aspersions on their relationship. So it's not for me to you know, give any kind of insight as to why Alan decided to leave. You know, I love him as a friend, love him as an artist, and I respect him greatly. But that was his decision. But when we were at Olympic doing the backing tracks, I can remember the guys, I think Dave might have been living in New York at the time, I'm not sure. But anyway, the guys came in to the studio, I would say 2, maybe 3 times in the time that we were there. One, they had a meeting about a video, and there was a merchandise meeting. I remember that, and then the covers for singles. I think it was the "Walking in My Shoes" cover as well. Various things like that, but they just weren't around, and so that's no detriment to their part in the band, or some of the parts, etc. But it is so true. But it was a lot of work. I can imagine. And then after, as you say, they spent pretty much a year making the record, mixing it, doing all that, then moving on to doing, the live stuff, and then this whole, the live tour, and all the other, as I say, all the videos and all that stuff that came. That I wasn't really party to. I wasn't involved in those meetings, of course not. But when it all came together, it really, again, and I was involved, but it really blew me away. And even now, when looking at it, and it's also, I think the other time when I really enjoyed it, funnily enough, is I went to Dublin to mix the tracks for the video. So it was going to be a double live album. And we had been to the States to do, I'd been to the States. No, I hadn't, excuse me. I hadn't done One Caress then. So it was going to be the double live album. I went after Dublin to do One Caress, to record it. And I went to see the show, really. But I was on my own in the studio in Dublin and working away, mixing this stuff. And it was like my own private video and sound show. I don't know how to describe it, really. It was just it was like listening back to this stuff. I was like, wow, it actually does sound really good. I think at those times you really appreciate it. And I remember Alan walking in. I remember like it was yesterday. So I had my Sony headphones on, and he walked into to the studio in Dublin, and I didn't know he was there. And typical Alan, he'd put my hand on my shoulder. I turned around and goes, "It sounds shit." Big smile on his face. Yeah. And really. I'm really proud of that, and when he was there for a period of time, and then I did finish some stuff off, but I would, there was no uploading files. You had to send DATs, and I finished songs off after he'd left, conversation about the mixes, and he was like, "Oh, sounds great, and that's really not, when mates, okay, fine. And he wasn't saying it because we're friends and because we've worked on it for so long. He's too professional to lie. No, absolutely, course, and I respect his opinion greatly, and so it was really nice. And it was really enjoyable time.
Can I just as I say, I just want to take my hat off to you, not only as a fan but also as a guy who has a go at producing music himself. Yeah, that what you guys did, not only in the recall but also the backing shows to the backing tracks to Devotional. Wow, and just like the sub bass and I'm thinking of that Fly in the Windscreen, that you just took everything, and it wasn't basically the backing tracks. Everything was reworked. Everything was reprogrammed.
Everything was
to bring it in line with this new sound.
Yeah.
At the time.
So everything was kind of moved into the new. I would say modernised. That doesn't sound.
That were reprogrammed. It wasn't just taking stuff from.
Yeah. It was reprogrammed and resampled and rearranged, and it had to be done in a certain way so that it could be put into the set list, and it had to be remodeled and reworked.
Yeah.
So it was just a lot of work, but I loved it. It was great, listening to those songs, like flying a windscreen, for example, flying a windshield. Just look at that, it rocked out was the thing that I enjoyed.
Right, Mr. Lyon, I see you've got a very interesting look at very date.
Well, you were asking me earlier about memorabilia or bits and pieces. This is my it's quite an old box of bits.
It's like it's been around. Yes.
It's been around, yeah. I mean, I went on tour in the early mid-80s with Tuk and then Mike and the Mechanics and one thing or another. But it just happens to be a DAT box collection, and it just so happens that I've got some of the rough mixes from Spain and Germany of Songs, Faith, Devotion.
Wow.
And I went out and recorded a few live gigs for the Devotional tour, and these are basically what they are.
So these are these are live recordings of the
basically off of the
soundboard,
off the truck that we were recording.
Yeah.
So I'd record it on a multi-track, and then there'd be a DAT running just to have a version of the concert, and then they were for the band really, and I did safety copies of them.
These have never been heard before.
No, not as far as I'm aware. But I mean, the thing is that I'm sure Mute have a copy of them, but I've just had them for years, and they're just in my box of bits. There's all kinds of things in here. There's all. What's that one? There's some. That's the single. Oh yeah, so there's the DAT of the Paris mixes of Condemnation. We did another version of Condemnation, which was the Paris mix. We added a loop to it and stuff like that. So that's basically what's in there, along with a random cassette of the Goons for some reason. I don't really know why that's in there, but that's what you get. Going around. Anyway, so that's my box of bits. There's some cassettes and stuff as well in there.
Well, that's just put that in a safe somewhere safe.
It is going to be somewhere safe.
Listen, Steve, I just want to say thank you so much. We've and I say this to everyone that I interview. I always say thank you for your patience, because I did this to Aid Fenton as well. Bless him. He probably thought he was being interrogated. It was like a 3-hour interview, but he said it. He said it didn't feel that bad. So I don't know what he said behind my back, but anyway. Please accept this as a token of my gratitude. It's a bit crumpled now.
Blimey.
Are you a whiskey drinker?
I am now. Put it that way. Fantastic. I'm not a whiskey connoisseur, so.
Well, it's a bottle of Shivers. It's
there we go.
We got Mr. Basco one as well. He thinks
fantastic. Yeah, I do have a small collection of alcohol over there, and then there's some wine over there.
Oh, well.
Mate, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Really appreciate this.
Thank you very much. And the team as well.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it.
Well, thanks a lot, and we'll be coming to bother you for some more content, hopefully soon. Thank you very much. This has been such an eye-opening experience.
Brilliant.
Guys, Steve Lyon.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.